Madison Square Garden, New York City. November 1994. 25,000 people packed into one of the world's most iconic venues, all waiting for Whitney Houston to perform the song that had defined an entire generation. The Bodyguard soundtrack had turned Whitney into more than just a superstar. She had become a cultural phenomenon, a voice that transcended music and touched the deepest parts of the human soul. But on this particular night, something was about to happen that would prove Whitney's gift wasn't just about her voice. It was about her heart. She was halfway through "I Will Always Love You" when it happened. Whitney's voice was soaring through that impossible bridge, the moment where her vocals defied every law of human capability, when suddenly a woman's voice cut through 25,000 people singing along. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But somehow, impossibly, Whitney heard it. "Please, Whitney, sing for my daughter who can't hear anymore." The entire arena seemed to hold its breath as Whitney stopped singing mid-note. The band continued for a few bars before slowly, uncertainly, fading into silence. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in concert history, proving that sometimes the greatest performances happen when the music stops. Her name was Margaret Chun, and she had been planning this moment for 8 months. Not the interruption. That was spontaneous desperation. But getting to this concert with her 17-year-old daughter Sarah had required every ounce of determination, savings, and hope that Margaret possessed. Sarah had been born with perfect hearing and an even more perfect voice. From the time she was 3 years old, people would stop Margaret in grocery stores and shopping malls, amazed by the little girl who sang constantly, effortlessly, beautifully. By age 7, Sarah was performing in school concerts and church choirs. By 12, she had been accepted into the prestigious Juilliard pre-college program for vocal performance. But Sarah didn't just love to sing. She loved Whitney Houston with the kind of pure, uncomplicated devotion that only teenagers can feel. Her bedroom walls were covered with Whitney posters. She knew every song, every run, every breath of every recording. She would spend hours analyzing Whitney's technique, trying to understand how one human voice could contain so much power and emotion simultaneously. Sarah used to say that Whitney didn't just sing songs, she told stories with her soul, Margaret recalled years later. She would listen to "I Will Always Love You" dozens of times a day, not because she wanted to copy it, but because she wanted to understand it. Then came February 14, 1994. Valentine's Day. Sarah was walking home from her Juilliard class when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Amsterdam Avenue and West 65th Street. The impact threw Sarah's body 30 feet through the air. She landed on her head, and the traumatic brain injury she sustained should have killed her. For 3 days, doctors told Margaret to prepare for the worst. Sarah was in a coma, and even if she survived, the damage to her brain was catastrophic. But Sarah did survive. She opened her eyes on the 4th day, recognized her mother, and even managed a weak smile. The doctors called it a miracle. Margaret called it a second chance. Then came the devastating news that would change everything. The trauma to Sarah's temporal lobe had destroyed her auditory processing centers. Sarah Chun, the girl who lived for music, the teenager who dreamed of singing on Broadway, the young woman who worshipped Whitney Houston, was now completely and permanently deaf. The silence that followed Sarah's diagnosis was more than just the absence of sound. It was the death of a dream, the erasure of an identity, the loss of the thing that had defined her entire young life. Sarah fell into a depression so deep that doctors worried she might not survive it. She refused to eat, refused to learn sign language, refused to engage with the world in any way. For Sarah, a life without music wasn't worth living. Margaret watched her daughter disappear into herself and felt helpless to stop it. She tried everything: therapy, medication, support groups, but nothing reached Sarah. The vibrant, joyful girl who used to fill their apartment with constant singing had been replaced by a ghost who sat in silence, staring at nothing. Then one night, 8 months after the accident, Margaret was cleaning Sarah's room and found something hidden under her daughter's pillow. It was a ticket stub from a Whitney Houston concert, the concert Sarah was supposed to attend 2 weeks after her accident, the concert she never got to see. Margaret stood in her daughter's room, holding that ticket stub, and made a decision. If Sarah couldn't hear Whitney Houston anymore, at least she could see her. At least she could be in the presence of the person whose music had meant everything to her. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was hope. Margaret spent the next 6 months saving every penny she could, working double shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, selling family heirlooms, doing anything to afford 2 tickets to Whitney's upcoming Madison Square Garden concert. Getting Sarah to agree to go was harder than raising the money. Sarah hadn't left their apartment except for medical appointments in 8 months. The thought of being in a crowd of 25,000 people, all experiencing something she could never experience again, felt like torture. But Margaret was persistent. "You don't have to hear her to feel her," Margaret told Sarah repeatedly. "Whitney's music isn't just sound. It's energy. It's emotion. You can still experience that." Finally, reluctantly, Sarah agreed to go, if only to make her mother stop asking. The night of the concert, Margaret and Sarah took their seats in the lower level, close enough to see Whitney clearly, but far enough back that they weren't in the chaotic front rows. Sarah sat rigidly, her arms crossed, her face expressionless. She was there physically, but emotionally, she had built walls that seemed impenetrable. As the lights dimmed and the crowd erupted in anticipation, Sarah felt nothing but emptiness. Around her, 25,000 people were losing their minds with excitement, but she existed in a bubble of silence. Then Whitney appeared on stage, and something shifted in Sarah's chest. It wasn't sound, obviously, but it was something. The way Whitney moved, the way she commanded the stage, the way her presence seemed to fill the entire arena even before she sang a single note. There was a power there that transcended hearing. Margaret glanced at her daughter and saw tears streaming down Sarah's face. For the first time in 8 months, Sarah was feeling something. Whitney opened with "I'm Every Woman," and while Sarah couldn't hear the music, she could feel the bass vibrations through her seat, through the floor, through her entire body. She could see the joy on the faces around her, could see the way 25,000 people moved as one organism, all connected by Whitney's voice. She watched her mother singing along, tears of happiness streaming down her face, and Sarah felt something break open inside her. This was what she had been missing. Not just the music, but the connection. The shared human experience of being moved by something beautiful. Song after song, Whitney delivered the performance of her life. Sarah watched every moment, studied every gesture, read every emotion on Whitney's face. She began to understand something she had never fully grasped before. Music wasn't just what you heard. It was what you felt. It was what you saw. It was the way Whitney's face transformed when she hit a particularly powerful note. It was the way the crowd swayed together like wheat in wind. It was the vibrations that traveled through the floor and into your bones. Then Whitney began the opening notes of "I Will Always Love You." And something inside Sarah cracked completely. This was the song she had listened to thousands of times. The song she had been learning to sing the day before her accident. The song that represented everything she had lost. Margaret looked at her daughter and saw Sarah's face contorting with pain, with grief, with a loss so profound it seemed impossible to bear. Without thinking, driven purely by maternal desperation, Margaret stood up and shouted the words that would change everything. Whitney Houston had performed "I Will Always Love You" hundreds of times. She knew every reaction, every moment when crowds would go wild, every breath that would elicit screams. But she had never experienced anything like the voice that cut through 25,000 people during that bridge. It wasn't what the woman said that made Whitney stop. It was how she said it. There was something in that voice, a desperate love, a mother's anguish, that bypassed Whitney's ears and went straight to her heart. The band kept playing for a moment, confused, but Whitney had already lowered her microphone and was walking to the edge of the stage, squinting into the lights trying to find the source of that voice. "Say it again." Whitney spoke into her microphone, her famous voice now conversational, intimate. "What did you say about your daughter?" Margaret, shaking with adrenaline and fear and hope, stood up from her seat. Sarah tried to pull her mother back down, mortified by the attention, but Margaret had come too far to stop now. "My daughter," Margaret's voice broke. "She's deaf. She lost her hearing in an accident. She loved you so much, Whitney. She wanted to be a singer like you. And now she can't even hear your voice anymore." The arena was so quiet that Margaret's words carried clearly through the space. 25,000 people all turned to look at the Asian woman standing in section 112, tears streaming down her face, holding the hand of a teenage girl who was trying to disappear into her seat. Whitney stood at the edge of the stage, one hand over her heart, visibly emotional. "What's your daughter's name?" Whitney asked softly. "Sarah," Margaret answered. "Sarah Chun. She's 17. And she would give anything to hear you sing again." Whitney was quiet for a long moment, and those close to the stage could see tears forming in her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah, can you stand up, please? I want to see you." Sarah wanted to die. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. 25,000 people were staring at her, and she couldn't even hear what they were probably saying about her. But her mother was squeezing her hand, and something in Margaret's face made Sarah slowly, reluctantly, stand up. Whitney looked at this beautiful young girl, standing there with tears streaming down her face, and something inside the superstar broke. "Sarah," Whitney said, and even though Sarah couldn't hear the words, she could read Whitney's lips. "Would you come up here with me?" Sarah shook her head frantically. "No, absolutely not." This was already mortifying enough. But Whitney wasn't giving up. "Please, Sarah, I want to sing for you. I want to sing to you. Will you let me do that?" The crowd began to applaud, encouraging Sarah, and Margaret was already moving, already guiding her daughter toward the stage. Security helped them navigate the barriers, and within moments, Sarah Chun was climbing the steps to the Madison Square Garden stage, about to stand face to face with her hero. When Sarah reached the stage, Whitney walked over and took both of the girls' hands in hers. Up close, Whitney could see that Sarah was terrified, overwhelmed, shaking, but she could also see something else. She could see a wounded soul, a broken heart, a person who had lost the thing that made them feel alive. "Can you read lips?" Whitney asked slowly, making sure Sarah could see her mouth clearly. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good," Whitney smiled. "Because I'm going to tell you something important. Are you ready?" Sarah nodded again, tears now flowing freely. "You haven't lost music, Sarah. Music isn't just something you hear. It's something you feel. It's something you are. Do you understand me?" Sarah wanted to believe her, but she couldn't. How could Whitney, with that impossible voice, with that gift that defined her entire existence, possibly understand what it felt like to lose that gift? Whitney seemed to read Sarah's thoughts. "I know you don't believe me right now," Whitney said. "So I'm going to prove it to you." What Whitney Houston did next had never been done on a major concert stage before. She turned to her band and her backup singers and made a decision that shocked everyone, including her own team. "I need everyone to stop playing," Whitney announced into her microphone. "I need complete silence." The arena went dead quiet. 25,000 people barely breathing. Whitney turned back to Sarah, who was standing there confused, scared, having no idea what was happening. "Sarah," Whitney said, making sure the girl could see her lips clearly. "I'm going to sing, 'I Will Always Love You' for you. But I'm going to sing it in a way you can experience." Whitney handed her microphone to one of her backup singers, then did something extraordinary. She took Sarah's hand and placed it flat against her throat. "Keep your hand right here," Whitney instructed. "You're going to feel every note. You're going to feel the vibration of my voice through your hand. That's how you'll hear me." Sarah's eyes went wide with understanding and disbelief. Whitney positioned herself directly in front of Sarah, close enough that the girl could see every expression on her face, every emotion in her eyes. Then, without any accompaniment, without any microphone, Whitney Houston began to sing, "I Will Always Love You," a cappella with Sarah's hand pressed against her throat. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah felt the vibrations of Whitney's voice traveling through her hand, up her arm, into her chest. It wasn't hearing, exactly, but it was something. She could feel the low notes rumbling, could feel the high notes flutter, could feel the power and control and emotion of Whitney's voice in a way she had never experienced when she could hear. More than that, she could see Whitney's face, could see the way her eyes closed when she sang the most emotional lines, could see the love and compassion and complete presence that Whitney was offering her in this moment. Whitney sang the entire song, every verse, every bridge, every impossible note, all while maintaining eye contact with Sarah and making sure the girl's hand stayed pressed against her throat. 25,000 people watched in absolute silence, witnessing something sacred, something that transcended performance and became pure human connection. By the time Whitney reached the final lines, both she and Sarah were crying openly. When the song ended, the silence continued for several heartbeats. Then the entire arena erupted in applause so thunderous that Sarah could feel it vibrating through the stage floor. Whitney pulled Sarah into a tight embrace, and the girl collapsed into the arms of her idol, sobbing with a release that was 8 months in the making. "You felt that, didn't you?" Whitney whispered into Sarah's ear, even though she knew Sarah couldn't hear the words. But Sarah could feel Whitney's breath, could feel the vibration of her voice, and somehow that was enough. Whitney kept holding Sarah as she spoke to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sarah Chun. She's 17 years old, and she's a singer. She lost her hearing in an accident, but she hasn't lost music. She hasn't lost her voice. She hasn't lost her soul. Whitney pulled back to look at Sarah, making sure the girl could read her lips. You're going to sing again, Sarah? Maybe not the way you did before, but you're going to find a new way. Because real artists always find a way. What happened after that night at Madison Square Garden was extraordinary and completely unexpected. Whitney Houston, who was at the absolute peak of her career, decided that Sarah Chin's story mattered more than her own busy schedule. The morning after the concert, Margaret received a phone call from Whitney's management team. Whitney wanted to meet with Sarah again, privately, to talk about her future. 3 days later, Sarah and Margaret found themselves in a recording studio in Manhattan, sitting across from Whitney Houston, who was drinking tea and looking at Sarah with genuine interest and concern. I've been thinking about you since the concert, Whitney said, making sure Sarah could see her lips. And I want to help you, but I need you to be honest with me. Do you still want to be a singer? Sarah had been asked this question by therapists, by her mother, by well-meaning friends, and every time she had shut down, unable to even consider the possibility. But something about Whitney asking it made her really think. Did she still want to be a singer? Or had she just wanted to be someone who could hear? After a long moment, Sarah nodded. Yes, she still wanted to sing. She just had no idea how. Good, Whitney smiled. Because I know someone who can teach you. Whitney explained that she had spent the previous 2 days making phone calls to vocal coaches, music therapists, and deaf performers around the world. She had found a community of deaf musicians who were creating incredible art, who were proving every day that music transcended sound. Whitney had arranged for Sarah to work with Dr. Elizabeth Bergman, a pioneering music therapist who specialized in helping deaf individuals reconnect with music through vibration, visual cues, and kinesthetic learning. But Whitney didn't stop there. She personally funded Sarah's rehabilitation and education for the next 4 years, covering everything from therapy to specialized equipment to tuition at a progressive music program designed for deaf and hard-of-hearing students. She checked in with Sarah regularly, sending encouraging messages through Margaret, and even brought Sarah to a recording session where she could experience the production process from a completely different perspective. The transformation in Sarah was gradual but profound. Working with Dr. Bergman, she learned to feel music through vibrations in the floor and special equipment that translated sound frequencies into tactile sensations. She learned to watch conductors and other performers for visual cues. Most importantly, she learned that her own voice, which she couldn't hear, could still be trained and controlled through technique and feedback from others she trusted. 2 years after that night at Madison Square Garden, Sarah Chin performed her first public concert as a deaf singer. She sang, "I Will Always Love You" in American Sign Language while a choir of deaf students provided vocal backing that Sarah conducted entirely through visual cues. The performance was filmed and sent to Whitney, who called Margaret immediately, crying with pride and joy. "Your daughter is exactly who I knew she would be," Whitney told Margaret. "She's not letting anything stop her from sharing her gift with the world." Sarah went on to become an advocate for deaf musicians, creating programs and resources for young people who lost their hearing and thought they had lost music along with it. She gave speeches at schools and conferences, always telling the story of the night Whitney Houston stopped a concert for a deaf girl and proved that music lives in the heart, not just the ears. Whitney Houston's decision to stop her concert and sing for Sarah Chin had ripples that extended far beyond that one night. The video footage of Whitney singing a cappella with Sarah's hand on her throat became one of the most shared concert moments in history, watched by millions of people around the world. But more importantly, it sparked a conversation about accessibility in music and inspired other artists to think more deeply about how they could make their performances inclusive for fans with disabilities. Several major concert venues began implementing programs for deaf and hard-of-hearing fans, including special vibration platforms and visual interpreters for lyrics. Music therapy programs for individuals who had lost their hearing received increased funding and attention. Sarah's story, and Whitney's response to it, proved that disability didn't mean the end of artistic dreams, just a different path to the same destination. For Whitney personally, the experience with Sarah had a profound impact during a time when her own life was becoming increasingly complicated. The mid-90s marked the beginning of Whitney's well-documented struggles with addiction and personal turmoil. But people close to Whitney said that she would often reference that night at Madison Square Garden as a reminder of why she had been given her gift in the first place. Whitney talked about Sarah all the time, said her longtime friend and collaborator, Ricky Minor. Especially during her darker periods, she would bring up that concert and say that singing for that deaf girl was the purest thing she'd ever done with her voice. It reminded her that fame and record sales didn't matter. What mattered was human connection. In a tragic parallel, when Whitney's own voice began to deteriorate due to the effects of substance abuse, she would sometimes think about Sarah and find a strange comfort in knowing that even if her voice completely failed, music would still exist within her. Sarah had proven that music could transcend the physical mechanics of hearing and singing. It was a spiritual thing, an emotional thing, a human thing. When Whitney Houston died in February 2012, Sarah Chun was devastated. She released a statement through her foundation, written in both English and American Sign Language, thanking Whitney for saving her life and showing her that disability was just a different way of experiencing the world, not a limitation. Whitney gave me back my voice when I thought I'd lost it forever, Sarah wrote. She proved that the greatest gift an artist can give isn't a perfect performance, it's authentic compassion. The story of Whitney Houston and Sarah Chun reveals something fundamental about what it means to be human. We live in a world that constantly tells us our value is determined by our abilities, our talents, our achievements. We're taught that losing a gift means losing ourselves. But that night at Madison Square Garden, Whitney taught 25,000 people and eventually millions more that our worth isn't determined by what we can do, but by who we are. Sarah didn't need to hear Whitney's voice to experience its power. The music was already inside her. The love was already there. Whitney just helped her remember that truth. In the same way, Whitney didn't need perfect circumstances or a perfect life to make an impact that would last forever. She just needed to show up fully, to see another person's pain, and to offer whatever she could give in that moment. The greatest artists aren't always the ones with the most technical skill or the biggest commercial success. Sometimes the greatest artists are the ones who understand that their gifts aren't really theirs at all. They're meant to be shared, to heal, to connect, to remind us all that we're more than our limitations. Whitney Houston had one of the greatest voices in human history, but her real gift was her capacity to love, to empathize, to see someone in pain and refuse to look away. That's what happened on that November night in 1994. Whitney Houston could have kept singing. She could have ignored the desperate mother's plea. She could have finished her performance and gone home, and nobody would have blamed her. But she didn't. She stopped everything. She gave her full attention to one person, and she created a moment that would change 2 lives forever and inspire millions more. Years after that concert, a reporter asked Sarah Chun what she would say to other young people who had experienced a devastating loss, who felt like their dreams were over, who couldn't imagine how they would ever feel whole again. Sarah thought for a long moment before answering. "I would tell them what Whitney showed me that night," Sarah said, signing as she spoke. "I would tell them that loss is real and grief is real, and it's okay to feel broken. But I would also tell them that the things we think we've lost are often still there, just in a different form. The music didn't leave me when I lost my hearing. It just moved from my ears to my heart. And once I understood that, I realized I hadn't lost anything at all. I'd just learned a deeper way to listen." That's the legacy of Whitney Houston's gift. Not just her voice, though that was extraordinary, but her heart, which was big enough to see one girl's pain in a crowd of 25,000 people and brave enough to do something about it. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, where people pass by suffering without stopping, where convenience and efficiency are valued over compassion and presence, Whitney Houston's decision to stop singing and start caring shows us what really matters. The next time you see someone in pain, the next time you encounter someone who has lost something precious, the next time you have the opportunity to make a difference in one person's life, remember Whitney and Sarah. Remember that the greatest performances happen when we stop performing and start being human. Remember that music isn't what we hear, it's what we feel. Remember that love isn't something we say, it's something we do. Remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer another person isn't advice or platitudes or success. It's simple presence, authentic compassion, and the willingness to share whatever gift we have, even if it means stopping everything else. Whitney Houston stopped a concert for a deaf girl, and in doing so, she reminded us all what it means to be truly, fully, beautifully human. That's not just a good story. That's a legacy that will echo forever, far beyond the reach of any voice, no matter how powerful it might be.